It's a Hugh L. Sawyer Jr., a locomotive engineer and operating out of Atlanta, Georgia on the Norfolk Southern. And I'm the local chairman of BLE Division 316.
What is BLE?
BLET, I guess I should say, which is Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. We just added the and Trainmen a couple of years ago.
Okay, great.
Well, for me, I have a little bit of seniority now, and I'm approaching 20 years, so I actually work a specific job at a specific location at a specific time. And I'm on a pusher engine, and essentially I go to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and push coal trains over a mountain. It's called Braswell Mountain, just north of Atlanta. We get coal trains all the way from Wyoming to North Georgia with 3 engines, and then we have to add a 4th one to get it over this one specific point. The equivalent of thousands of truckloads. Just to move that one coal train. And if you think we have one power plant down there just north of Macon called Share, and it burns on average 1 train load of coal, about 17,000 tons every 8 hours. So we have to deliver 3 trains a day just to keep up with what it's burning. Of course, they like to stockpile.
My name is Ron Kamiko. I'm a locomotive engineer currently working for Amtrak. I came over from working on a freight railroad in 2004, prior to that. I'm a member of Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, Division 51, currently working out of Reno, Nevada.
If you're going to be on a train crew, you're going to hire out as a switchman / conductor. Now we're down to 2 men, and we have a conductor and a locomotive engineer. And so you will hire on. They will train you for about 6 months. You'll be and go on. Usually in Atlanta, you'll go on to the switchman's extra board. You work as a yard man, we call them, at a specific point there in Atlanta terminal, and just putting trains together and hustling around, getting mainline trains ready to roll. Okay, in this country, there's 13 rail unions representing 13 different crafts that comprise labor on the railroads. The carriers negotiate, typically their strategy is to negotiate with the weakest union out there, which are typically the clerk unions or the maintenance away workers, those areas where work can be contracted out fairly easily. And they go out there and they negotiate a contract with those people and get a lot of concessions. Unfortunately, that becomes a pattern agreement for every other railroad craft out here. And so that's one of the reasons we've been going backwards.
A railroader of average intelligence in the industry for a year or two comes to the realization that something is radically amiss. Why do we have all these different organizations that then don't go in unified to demand the things we want? Issues of health and safety, issues of pensions, wages, benefits, working conditions on the job. We feel like we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. All right, so as long as everybody seems to have everything, let's go ahead. We'll first look at the agenda. We're going to need to do a lot of just basic bread and butter housekeeping stuff here. And the first order of business really would be to approve the agenda with a minor amendment at this point.
And what the Railroad Workers United organization was formed by people who, we just realized that somehow we have to get these 13 rail unions to operate together, to work with each other when it comes to contract negotiations.
This is in. So with that said, I'd ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as written.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the draft agenda as written. Discussion on the question.
So I want to stress how vitally important it is for your kinds of organizations to come together and have a space in this conference. In your packets, you should have a pamphlet called the Cargo Chain. It's a pamphlet we put out in conjunction with another organization earlier this year. And it's part of the theme of something that we've been tracking for a while and observing for a while for transportation industry. And this is another critical element of why I think it's vitally important that an organization like yours exists, and that efforts like yours exist, even if they seem small, even if you seem isolated at times.
Virtually everything at one time or another, be it a raw product or the finished product, at some point it's on a train. And as the whole world, with globalization of the economy, virtually everything is going to containerized freight, or the majority of freight that's moved around the country and around the world. And it's going to go by ship, because a lot of it's either coming in or going out by ship, which means they go in and out of ports. Most people don't realize there's not enough trucks in the world to move the freight in America, if you were dependent on trucks. And there's already a truck driver shortage. And trains move, I think, about 20% of the freight, and most of the freight that we move has to go, including the containerized freight. There's no other option. It has to go by rail. Of course, you have a 40-hour work week for most people. And then truck drivers are on an hour of service law that essentially limits them to actually driving the truck for 300 hours a month. And for engineers and train crews can actually work for 430 plus hours theoretically a month, which is incredible if you think about it. We work fatigued, and keep in mind your off time includes your travel time to your home and getting ready. Most people have a life, and they're going to continue on and do those things that they need to get done. And it can be an exhausting routine, and for most people, we have no on-duty and off-duty time. You're just available to work 24/7. And the FRA has not, in my opinion, done their duty as far as the safety issues go. And they are just now starting to mandate that we're going to have more off time and more and designated off time and off duty days, because there have been so many wrecks and accidents out there that are attributed to crew fatigue. There's no question about it. And they've addressed, it's much more in your face, the truck drivers that wander off the road, and the great wrecks that we have around Atlanta at any rate, involving fatigued truck drivers. And that industry just got re-regulated quicker than we're going to be. But it's a definite concern because of what we haul. If I fall asleep and run the red board and run into another train, and I've got tankfuls of chlorine behind me, and those tanks break open, depending on where I am, I've killed potentially hundreds of thousands of people. So it's a big deal, and I will tell you that the companies, of course, want to have the fewest employees that can work the maximum amount of time. And then because we're paid by the mile and what have you, there's historically been resistance by the crews themselves to having their hours curtailed, because you're also curtailing their pay.
As Ron said, I'm going to speak a little bit about the history of RWU and kind of catch everybody up to date. In early 2005, with a core group of about 3 or 4 people, actually 4 people, we started Railroad Operating Crafts United, ROCU. And the goal of ROCU was to bring about a merger of the UTU and the BLET. We were operating craft people, and we recognized the fact for 30 years that divisiveness between the unions had cost us working wages, it cost us bad contracts, it cost us loss of work rules, and we were determined that we were going to attempt to bring about a merger of those 2 unions and bring the solidarity in the operating crafts that we needed.
We belong to 2 different unions that are always at each other's throats, and to the detriment of the rank and file of both organizations and both crafts. So this organization, ROCU, was formed by concerned rank and file members that were going to attempt to get, somehow facilitate getting the 2 unions to cooperate with each other, and ultimately we felt needed to merge with each other, because together they would be a more powerful entity than as 2 separate crafts with 2 separate unions, at each other's throats, as opposed to being at the carrier's throat. the BLE, which is the oldest union in the country, chose to associate itself, merge with the Teamsters to get underneath that international umbrella of it. But the UTU, they too were in the same position of having to merge with somebody, but they were going to merge with anybody but the Teamsters, because they were going to merge with anybody but the BLE.
The UTU announced the smart merger, that they were going to merge. They unveiled this secret merger agreement they had in the work they'd been doing to merge with the sheet metal workers. And of course, the BLET, part of the Teamsters in the Change to Win coalition, the UTU and the SMWIA, if that became smart, in the AFL-CIO, we realized that our dream, our goal of merging those two operating unions would never happen. So we mounted a vote no campaign and tried to convince the UTU members to vote against it. We weren't big enough. We didn't have enough yet. So that merger passed.
At that point in time, we recognized that it would be too cumbersome to try to, we were never going to get the BLE and the UTU under one banner at that point in time. What to do now? Do we just disband? Do we give up, or what? And somewhere, in the conference calls and what have you, the idea germinated. No, we're going to continue on, and we're going to expand our horizon and attempt to unite the rank and file at any rate, form a pan-railroad organization whose ultimate goal is to get 13 railcraft unions to work with each other and work in conjunction against the carrier.
The RCO, or remote control issue, is a curious one. Basically, back in the 90s, the rail carriers were interested in implementing remote control operations in the United States. The United Transportation Union, the UTU, which largely represents most of the trainmen or conductors, brakemen, switchmen in the United States, swore that they would never tolerate the use of remote control, how unproven, untested, how dangerous it was, a threat to the safety and security of their members, which I agree with. The Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers didn't have such harsh rhetoric, partly because they might have felt that they would be the natural person to control the remote control. They would be the operator. The UTU was very, very frightened that the BLET, or the BLE at the time, would cut a deal and basically hold the contract, and therefore the jobs of the remote control operator and the UTU represented members would be left out in the cold. Well, in early 2000, 2001, thereabouts, the UTU and the BLE were in heavy negotiations for a merger. There was a number of attempts made. The merger failed. Upon its failure, exactly what we could have expected did in fact happen. The United Transportation Union cut the deal with the carriers first. They managed to sell their members on the idea. And now, a young switchman working in the freight yard, like here in Detroit, not only has to learn his own job, which has traditionally been coupling cars together, making cuts on equipment, making air tests, coupling hoses together, putting the cars in the right order by using a switch list and so forth. He has to actually operate the locomotive with a belt pack that's belted around his waist. And for this effort, he gets 46 extra minutes, 46 minutes pay. Now he's doing the job of the engineer and the trainman for 46 minutes. They're getting a hell of a deal here. They're eliminating a job on the crew, and what are they paying? 46 extra minutes. That's an unbelievable benefit to the carrier in savings. And so I look at it and say, well, we got screwed. Some people would say, well, that's the UTU for you, it's a scab union. I'd say, no. You take two organizations and put them together fighting for the crumbs, and they know that if that one cuts the deal with the carrier first, we're out in the cold. So we better make sure that we're the ones to cut the deal with the carrier, because we'd rather leave them and their members out in the cold than us and our members. It's a race to the bottom. This is just one example of what's been going on in the rail industry for decades in terms of inter-union competition, inter-craft competition, where different unions, different crafts are literally backstabbing each other, cutting deals with the carrier to see who can get the first deal, who can get the best deal, and the hell with the other guys in the other union. This is not unionism. I don't know what you call it, but we're scabbing on each other. It's union scabbery. Had the United Transportation Union and the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers merged back in 2000, 2001, obviously we could have presented a united front to the carrier and possibly have limited the use of remote control, possibly have prevented its implementation on roads all across the United States altogether.
Right now, I figured it out one night on a pig train. A pig train's haul is a containerized freight train. And I figured I had 200 trailers, and they're paying me 7/1,000ths of a penny, and that's rounding up, by the way, per mile per trailer, versus a union truck driver who is earning about 57 cents per mile per trailer. So even if you increased my pay to 7/100th of a penny per mile per trailer, it would be a heck of a boost. I mean, I'd be perfectly happy with the income. I figure a truck hauls on average 20 tons, and I'm probably being generous when I say that. You pay me 41 cents per mile per 20 tons that I'm hauling, and you'll hear no complaint from me, because one loaded coal train from Chattanooga to Atlanta, Georgia, I had figured out about 17,000 tons. I think I worked it out. You'd pay me something like $58,600 and something odd dollars to move that one loaded coal train from Chattanooga to Atlanta.
All in favor of accepting this resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Resolution number 7, resolution on the Iraq War. Sure.
Resolution number 7, RW on the Iraq War, whereas what we really need is a union which goes to the table, to the bargaining table with the carriers, and says, none of us will settle until all of us settle. We're all union brothers and sisters on this railroad. We all work for the same company, and as a result, we're not going to let you screw this group or that group at this round of bargaining. We're going to stand together until every craft, every union is satisfied with the tentative agreement and is willing to vote yes on a contract. Because to do otherwise is going to continue this continual race to the bottom where we stab each other in the back, we cut deals with the carrier, and who does it benefit? The rail carriers. It certainly does not benefit the rank and file workers on the railroad.
And I have to say that ultimately, and this is from a personal level, I'm involved in this because to me this is another step unifying the railroad labor workers into some sort of one organization that can then work in conjunction with other transportation workers and the longshoremen, truck drivers, barge operators, and even airplane, the aircraft industry that's hauling freight. Transportation needs to be united. Transportation workers of all stripes need to be united into one union ultimately.
Well, a number of us in the industry for years have felt that we should have one big union. I mean, you know, this is not a newfangled notion. In fact, Eugene Debs and the American Railway Union, which was organized in 1893 and actually had a very short life, and it was the first industrial union of its kind in the United States, was predicated upon this exact notion that railroad workers were screwing each other by not standing in solidarity across craft. The American Railway Union was an attempt to organize all workers on the railroad into the same organization to more effectively confront the carriers.
I want to stress, Railroad Workers United is not a union. It's a pan-American railroad rank and file worker organization. You know, we're just crossing the craft lines, but we're not merging unions. We're not a union. That's not our goal. And we're regulated by something that's called the Railroad Labor Act that was created back in I think 1929. And it's been modified, of course, here and there, but it's essentially, it hasn't been. And that was created, that act was created to create a balance between rail labor and railroad companies, because the strikes and the violence and everything that was going on back in those days needed to be curtailed. And it hampers labor, and it hampers the carriers in certain areas. We go on strike for some reason. On day one, we have affected Wall Street, because in the 21st century, we're getting so efficient with moving goods around that we no longer warehouse goods. And it actually costs money to do that. And the warehouses are the trains and the containers as they're moving from point A to point B. And corporations and businesses have become much more reliant on just on-time, just-in-time delivery of this freight. We're just part of a transportation network it's fragile, and it's you know, if it shuts down for any reason, it causes big problems that ripple through the economy almost immediately. Because we are so powerful, as far as if we shut down, we create a national economic emergency almost immediately. So the federal government, essentially the president, has emergency orders that they're signed and sitting somewhere ready to go that order rail workers back to work, which he can do. You know, that's a power given to him. So in a way, we've had the power of a strike taken away from us. And if one railroad goes on strike, typically the carriers work together and they'll lock out everybody to create a national emergency, and you know, and get those emergency orders, you know, back. We would have to defy federal law. And of course, my reaction to that is, I mean, it takes guts to do that, and I don't know that most people have the guts to do it in this day and age. Most of your rail workers are in debt, just like most middle-class Americans, up to their teeth, and they don't even want to go on strike. They would like to earn more money and like to solve some of these work rule issues that we have.
Into the 1990s and now into the 2000s, and we see a situation where 125 years of craft union divisiveness has led us into a situation where we're literally fighting for our survival as unions. Hence the need for things like Railroad Workers United. Where there's a need for us is to do what the unions aren't doing, unfortunately, which is building solidarity, opening the lines of communication between car knockers, track workers, signal maintainers, trainmen, engineers, yardmasters, dispatchers. We work in an environment where most of us in a craft don't really even know the names of people in the other crafts. Railroad Workers United proposes to build chapters, especially in large terminals all across the country, where railroaders can come together on a monthly basis and meet each other, can talk about common problems and issues in the terminal, can devise tactics and strategy and work together to solve issues without being isolated. So what Railroad Workers United offers every railroad worker in North America is a network to connect with like-minded railroaders who share their vision of unity, solidarity, internal union democracy, strength at the bargaining table.
There can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. One force on earth is weaker than the